gaze into the stars that shine with wonder in our eyes. Will we just destroy the planet, or is peace to be the prize? For the wail of fighting nations, it dims the beauty of the tune. Let's all dance the dance of freedom at the rising of the moon. At the rising of the moon, at the rising of the moon. Dance a dance of freedom at the rising of the moon. At the rising of the moon, at the rising of the moon. Stand up and be counted at the rising of the moon. Hey.
Hello.
Hi. How are ya?
Great. How are you?
Yeah, I'm here. That's what we need.
Yeah. Can you start by telling us your name?
Yeah, is Misha Áine Tyrrell. My name's Áine Tyrrell and is Askunde and Clara agus Galliab. I'm from County Clare and Galway on the west coast of Ireland. And living here on beautiful Bundjalung country, and yeah, with so much history and so much depth of being in circle and being together like this, and just acknowledging that this land was, never ceded. So we're sitting on stolen land, and fighting for the freedoms here while we fight for them everywhere else in the world too.
Tell us about growing up.
Well, my father and mum started their little family in Galway, in Clare, in the Burren. So we lived on the border of Galway and Clare. My dad's from Galway, and we grew up in the Burren, which is in Clare, which is this like beautiful. Well, actually, there's some rocks up there. There's beautiful rocks, and out in the middle of nowhere, and kind of a very alternative community, I suppose. My dad, as a musician and an artist, kind of found there, as opposed to maybe the more Catholic, stricter upbringings of other places. My dad and my mum, I suppose both of them have always stood up for freedoms and truths. And my dad, was very involved in, Irish conversation and struggle and Irish freedom, as well as every other injustice he saw in the world through art. So I suppose I learned that from a really young age. Also, I had time growing up in America because my mum and dad separated and she moved back. She's from both Ireland and Italian heritage. So she moved back, so we had time in America and time in Ireland, and really by the age of 13 I was done in America. Just kind of recognized it for what it was and just wanted to be home. And so then I moved back and finished my education over there in university, and music was a huge part of my life always, Yeah.
So activism runs in the family?
Yes, 100%, yeah. And I suppose using art and music and poetry to help us rise collectively and to speak to injustices and truths. And, my dad set old Irish poetry to music. He was always, he was one of the very few musicians from the Republic of Ireland that would go up to the north during the time of the Troubles, like he was always in the middle of it, and always, protesting against war for however long I can remember, wherever that was. And I suppose that he recognized, which is why he toured in America and played over there, but never came over to live at the times we were living there, because he couldn't handle the American war machine. I remember we were in school in America, and they made us, during the Iraq War, we had to have a pen pal that was a soldier, And my dad found out about it and flipped his lid, and I would have been only maybe, I don't know, 10 or 11 or something. I didn't understand. I was just like, oh, but everybody else has a pen pal. And then he just like, you know, called the school and was like, in no way is she, you know, he just recognized the indoctrination, the war machine. And he was very, so we were always kind of in conversation about that, and in conversation about our own fight for freedom and our own resistance. I think, you know, in Ireland, it was a hectic time, you know, like my grandmother was born in 1916, which was the year of the first rising against the Brits, and a lot of people died in that time. But then between 1916 and the 1940s, when we really gained independence, there was a lot of really difficult times in Ireland, and families still to this day that don't speak to each other because some fought on the British side and some fought on the Irish side. And you know, all those conversations kind of like I never heard my nana talk about any of that, you know. So then my dad's generation, he would have been kind of one of a handful of people talking about this stuff. And then like the next generation down, now we're all like, fuck this shit, we've got to talk about this. So it's like and even though my nana and my pop were, you know, beautiful humanitarians in their own circles and in their own way, like I don't think they would have been out, you know, but in the quiet you'd talk to them and they wouldn't want to, you know, my nana wouldn't buy biscuits from England. She'd be like, send us back to the shops. Make sure we bought the Irish ones, do you know?
Brilliant.
So like she was doing her own little resistance in her own ways, but it wasn't like, but my dad was one of the few, you know, who was really willing to agitate things and talk
What's
about
your dad's
stuff.
name?
Sean Tyrrell. And through his art and music and activism, I suppose we all grew up with that. And my siblings, I suppose we all do it in our own way. Like my sister was a lawyer in the UN. Now she just is a regular practicing lawyer. But you know, my brother does poetry and speaks about stuff. My other brother is just like the glue that holds us all together. Like I think we've all figured out how to, you know, integrate those lessons, especially, the ones from Ireland down through the lines in our own way. You know, through me, it's through music and song and art and talking shit, you know.
As an Irish woman, you're no stranger to Palestine. Can you talk to us about that?
Yeah, I suppose there's never been, I don't remember a time where I wasn't aware of it. Like there's not like, I think I've met a lot of people here in so-called Australia that October 7th was kind of the first time that they were aware that there was, that there was Palestine, that there was this whole, you know, I don't remember a time of it like landing. We just always were quite aware of this solidarity as well between Ireland and Palestine. You know, even you just have to drive through Belfast in particular, you know, and now in the Republic you'll see a lot more of it, but like graffiti walls that just have the Irish flag and the Palestinian flag. There was always solidarity coming from Palestine during the time of our, you know, hunger strikes and uprisings, and then the same solidarity going back. And, you know, my dad used to host Palestinian musicians that would come over. My brother has been to Palestine. Like so many artists and musicians in Ireland have been over to the refugee camps to do cultural sort of musical exchanges, and a lot of Palestinians coming to Ireland to do the same. So I think that culture war that I see so evident here in the Australian music industry, you see it in America in media and entertainment. I just think in Ireland that never took hold because we already had cultural connection back and forth for so many generations. So like by the time I was a performing artist, you know, I think it was probably 2015. When was the peace walks along the walls there, and the last kind of uprising in Palestine? We all signed, you know, the petitions never to play in Israel and not to take funding from Israel. So like, I mean, I would say that's probably 10 years ago that my dad and I signed those petitions where they're just really, and it's a solid group of music. Like Sinead O'Connor refused to play over there. Like it's a solid group of Irish musicians that have just been always vocal about our support for Palestine and refusing to take, you know, it's the same as like the apartheid in South Africa, you know. It was an Irish worker at our version of Woolies, Dunnes Stores, who refused to handle a grapefruit that was from South Africa, and she got fired over it. And that whole case started like a massive BDS movement for South Africa. So like we're not new to the conversations around like what one person or one artist or one worker in a shop, like we know the power of like one person standing up and making an action. And I think we've seen so many examples. I mean, I'm lucky in my very personal family. My dad was always, we were marching for Palestine, we were there. And we were marching against, you know, American warplanes stopping in Shannon, which is our local airport. They refuel in there going to Iraq. They were refueling in there going to Afghanistan. And we're a neutral country. They shouldn't be refueling there, you know. So we were just always very active about the war machine, you know. So, and as well, coming from a history in Ireland of colonisation, we can see, like it didn't take me long landing here in Australia when I knew very little about the history here to start seeing the exact same tactics. And I remember my dad saying to me before I got here, you know, what they did they practiced on us and they perfected it in Indigenous Australia. And we were the first, we were their nearest neighbours. They practice all these things, take away their language, don't allow them to practice culture, literally break their hands if they're going to play their music, you know, shoot them if they're going to practice their traditional sports. You know, we had it all. And then like you see it here and how it's just like, yeah, evolved and become such a perfect machine of colonization here. And that's what we see as well in Palestine.
So tell me about the importance of resistance.
Yeah, long live the resistance. Because without it, what do we have, you know? I think it's also so fucking clear to us as Irish people because not only is it the same tools, but the exact same people. So like Balfour, you just have to look up bloody Balfour and what the Irish people called him before he was sent over to Palestine, you know? And then the black and tan soldiers who were a ruthless fucking army that was sent over to squash rebellion and to stop our resistance in Ireland. The black and tans were sent from Ireland straight over to Palestine, and they became the basis of the IDF, basically, of what we are seeing now. So these death merchants in Ireland, you know, completely allowed to do whatever they wanted to civilians, were the same human beings that were then sent. You know, Churchill had his hand in Ireland and he's had his hand in Palestine. The English government that carved up Ireland also carved up, you know, Palestine. So, and the same words and tactics towards our resistance. So we were terrorists. We were bombers. We were, the IRA were whatever they were painted as for so many years, and that still exists, you know, like it still exists, the trope, you know. You just have to look at a Hollywood movie and we're either drunk or angry, you know, or stupid, you know, these tropes. And look at the tropes of Palestinians, look at how they've used the kufiya in any Arab movie, like that's a sign of terrorist, you know, and it's a cultural fucking piece of art. You know, and so that was the same thing done to us. And there was so many years and, you know, conversations and talks about, you know, the British government will never sit down at the table with terrorists, will never sit. But the only way to eventuate peace was they had to sit down at the table with the IRA. And not that I agree with everything the IRA has ever done, but without them, we wouldn't have 26 counties in the Republic of Ireland, you know? And without them, the 6 counties that are now Northern Ireland and a co-share of rule, like, that would be all British, do you know? And there is like an eventual day where Britain is going to have to get out of Northern Ireland, and 32 counties will be Irish. And without that constant resistance in some form or another, we just wouldn't even have the conversation of peace and freedom. I wouldn't be Irish, I'd be British. Do you know what I mean? So resistance is for the love of land, for the love of culture, for the love of like humanity who are born and raised and breathe from that. And even if, you know, like my children who are growing up here, like, they're still Irish, they're still of the land, they're still, and the diaspora of Palestinians all around the world, like, their hope is in resistance. Like, you know, I wouldn't be able to tell my children they're Irish if we didn't have resistance. And I think it can be very, you know, for some reason it's like controversial to love resistance. You know, I don't agree with violence on any level, but what else is there when there is an incredible amount of violence and inequity being perpetrated on your land and people for so many generations? For us, it was 800 years, you know? Like, what else is there? Because you can try to sing about it, speak about it, poetry about it, share our stories. You try to talk about these things in whatever ways, you know, documentaries. But like, as long as we have, you know, armies and wars, and like, there will be the need for resistance. So, yeah, I don't think it's controversial. Resistance is love for me. And while I don't agree with violence, I don't know how else you fight a violent, oppressive system. You know, it doesn't seem to work to show our humanity and say, hello, we're just human beings as well. Hey, Brits, can you give us the land that you stole and the millions that died during our genocide, which they framed as a famine? Can you give us our land back that is now British? You know, like, it didn't work just that way, and the same with Palestine, you know.
So coming to Australia as an Irish woman, how was your experience, particularly around racism in Australia?
Yeah, I had no idea what I was coming to because I'd never been here prior to moving here. And we were in a global financial crisis in Ireland. It hit pretty bad there. And so many young people were emigrating at that time. And I thought, you know, it was a good move with myself, the kids, and my now ex-husband. You know, there was a lot of violence in our relationship and in coercion to come here. So whether I was fully conscious about what decisions I was making in coming here, it definitely separated me from family and connection, and made abuse be able to be a lot more accelerated here, you know. So I was kind of in fight or flight here my first few years, just trying to save what I thought was a healthy relationship and raise my kids. So I think it took me a while to kind of settle and try to understand what community was and you know, as soon as I kind of tried to get past, okay, like it's lovely and sunny and there's beaches. You know, I remember the first Australia Day being like, so like, what is Australia Day? You know, and asking. And everyone's like, just like come down to the beach. And, you know, so we went down and flags and like no one had any like, like explanation of the day for me. I was like, I don't really understand it. So then when I Googled it, I was just like, what? You know, and then, you know, slowly, little by little, I was living in suburbs outside of Melbourne and there just wasn't presence of Indigenous community. But slowly, as I started playing music and being put into world stages, because like all the other music that's not white Australian gets put into the world stage, and I got put in with the other world musicians, which were Indigenous musicians, right? So like everyone else is like not from here and they're on the main stage. And then the Indigenous people and people like me were on these like little side stages. And the first few shows I did, I just was like, oh, okay, so now I can feel what this place is and what the land is and what the stories are. Yes, there's culture here. There's fucking rich culture here. And the way Indigenous people were talking about land and family and connections and story and myth and folklore, like I was just like Ireland. Like it was just such a similar way of being encircled together and passing on stories and sharing. And so then you don't have to be in that community for very long to start witnessing your friends and extended groups outside of that, the violence that is perpetrated on them, the racism, the exclusion, even that example of a world stage, like, you know, like it wasn't long before it was just like, wow, you know. And then my dad kind of ringing in my ear being like, you know, what happened to us? You know, they practiced and they perfected it here. And so, you know, singing with musicians, I'm singing in my, you know, native language in Gaeilge, and just realizing how lucky in Ireland we were that we had some documentation and passing down of our language and songs and story, even through the depths of colonisation. And how it is harder here because it's 200 and something language groups. It's 200, and so many of those communities were so decimated, so spread out, so dislocated from land. So like my heart's just like breaking, you know, walking around and seeing the depths of what my dad had said, you know, like it just was so much more deep. And because the population is so much smaller here, you know, and you have like 97% here that are non-Indigenous and don't have an access point or a way in to understand a lot of the times of what is underneath their feet and the depth of culture and real beauty that this is. And then between mining and building and, you know, everything, you just see the destruction of land on top of the destruction of people. And yeah, it's really hard actually. The more you become involved and enmeshed and sort of travel around, and the more you see, the more disheartening and sort of deep the problems feel here. And the racism, I mean, straight away, I think I had been to like one of those mother and babies groups with the kids, you know, and I just was like, whoa. It's kind of like hen's parties, I didn't go back. But one of the women I had met there like lived like on a lake, and so I used to take the kids for a little walk around. Like she was really nice and everything. And I'm walking by with the kids, and her and her husband are throwing potatoes off their balcony down on me, like as a joke, you know, like as, oh, Irish people, you love potatoes, and there's some like phrase that you guys say like fiddly-dee potatoes or something, which I think is from some, I don't know, comedian from years ago or whatever, like, and it's like, okay, well, that's like really fucking weird, you know. And then I would get invited to sing at like Irish festivals here, and they would have like potato throwing competitions, or like, you know, dunk the leprechaun in a tank competitions, just like weird ass shit, you know. And at one, you're like, oh, like I love my culture and I want to show you who we are, but like this is not a culture. This is a really fucking weird version of what kind of Hollywood has sold back that's marketable or whatever. So, you know, I would call it what, xenophobia or something, not necessarily racism, but like it's just so weird. You have conversations, like I was at the doctor's a couple months back, and I got in there and he was like telling me this story about listening to some phonetics thing on the radio right before he came in, and he saw my name, Áine, which is A-I-N-E. It's an Irish name. It doesn't match up with English because it's fucking Irish, right? It's a whole nother language. And I get in there and he's like, oh, you know, and they were saying how this phonetics thing is working with kids, you know, this, he was explaining this thing, and he was like, but like, I really feel for like Irish kids, like, because like, how are they ever going to learn phonetics if AI means awe? And I was like, doctor, it's like a different language. Like that, our kids learn English and they learn Irish. Like, and he was like, no. But like, how are they going to do it? Because like, you know, it's different. Like, how are they going to know AI means awe? And I was like, well, because it actually the rules make sense in Gaeilge, in Irish. And I was like, oh, that's why they're all so drunken in the pub all the time. You know, and these sorts of things are like, I think as well because my name isn't like Mary or Grace. So like I walk around with like having to educate people every fucking day just because they have to pronounce my name. So then I get like this whole other like extra layer of just like, there's other languages in the world, lads. Like, you know, like, you know, like if I walked in and I was French and I had a French name, would you do the same thing? No, you'd just be like, oh, that's French. But like there's some weird ass shit here, you know, and it comes from like Irish people came here and were, you know, Indigenous people were the bottom of the rung, and in the Irish people that arrived here were not too far above them, you know. Now generations later, they've climbed the ladder because of proximity to whiteness, but when it first came here, you know, and it's the same British oppression from Ireland, so you've got the same characters again, and you know, a lot of them would have been sent here just for saying something like Free Palestine back then, which was like, you know, long live Ireland or something, do you know what I mean? So
too true. So tell me about your connection with Northern Rivers Friends of Palestine.
Yeah, well, so when October 7th happened, my immediate, because I've been aware of the situation for so long, and as soon as it happened, I was like, that's it, they're going to flatten Gaza. And like it was just, I basically had a visual representation of what we were actually seeing with those, like, you know, the slides of like before October 7th and then what the land looks like now. I just saw it. And so I remember putting something up because my whole community in Ireland were basically saying everything I was saying. There wasn't anything radical about saying, you know, after October 8th, 9th, 10th, you know, saying, yes, like I have empathy for any level of violence perpetrated against anyone, but I understood what that resistance was for and what it was in response to, and that there was going to be an immeasurable response from Israel. So I was speaking to that, and my DMs, my comments, my people that I knew from around here, musicians from the entire music industry, I just got like hammered, you know, as being anti-Semitic, and didn't I care about Israeli hostages or Israeli women or Israeli children or you know, I was just getting, and I realized, far out, like here I am in like very small percentage of people who A, have the knowledge and understanding and awareness around what this is, but B, who were speaking up about it, you know. So I knew from friends that were living in Melbourne that there was active groups down there. So I just like did a little Google and found that there was one here, you know. And yes, as soon as Subi announced the march, I think, you know, I'd reached out just saying, did he need help with a PA or anything like that? And then that was it. I was like, yeah. And Subi and Heidi I had known anyway. Our kids are in school together now, but they were as well before. And yeah, just to know that it was also so close to people in here in Mullumbimby, you know, just wanted to stand beside, and also just wanted to be around people who had any, you know, I felt like I was just like talking to either people who were like, oh, it's just so complicated, like there's, you know, two sides, like I don't know, you know, because genuinely they didn't know about the situation beforehand, you know, at that stage. I think anyone saying that now is just like there's so much information for them to find out. But I just kind of felt like what is all of this, you know? And around here it was just peace, love and light, and just trying to like skip the fact that there's been this violent fucking occupying force for decades, and you can't just skip ahead to peace, love and light without dealing with what the violent occupying force has done previous to that. So I felt like finally when I found all of you and everyone in that group, that there was just people that had some understanding of this and were in conversation about not only freedom for Palestine, but understanding how colonization works. And because that's been such a huge part of my own work and my own life, my family's life, I just can't be around people right now that are not in this. This is the conversation of our times. And if we don't deal with what the effects of colonization are on all these lands, and right now we're seeing it in extreme levels in Palestine. So if we're not talking about that, then we're ignoring it everywhere else, you know? So it kind of was like, a salve to find that there was at least other people here. Because the industry I'm in, the music industry, I suppose, is also so toxic. And so, you know, I had people shouting me in DMs, asking for money back at gigs, you know, calling me all sorts of things. Band members getting in touch with me from years ago, telling me this, that, and the other. And just to know that I have like other people that I can be like, oh, you know, okay, like it's okay. There's some of us here who are, you know, willing to talk about it, willing to say something, and yeah.
So what have
I
you
feel
been
lucky.
up to?
I feel lucky.
It's been a big 10 months.
Yeah.
I can't believe we're having this conversation nearly 10 months in. I don't think any of us could have imagined how long this could possibly go on for. So can you give us a little bit of a rundown of what you've been up to?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of feel like these last 10 months are a bit of a blur. I can't really think about, you know, like, yeah, much else. Like, it's always on my mind, even when I'm trying to, you know, be productive and do life and you know, provide for my family and move forward. How can you, you know? How can you when you know what's happening? And I suppose also knowing how deep the tools are of oppression in Ireland here and Palestine, it kind of like feels like we're finally seeing this crack, you know, where there are a lot of people worldwide who are no longer willing to turn away from these, like, it's as if we were kind of living in like oh yeah, there's stuff happening, but like just like straightforward and, you know, like live your best life, you know. Whereas I kind of feel like now at least we're being honest, you know. And I kind of feel like it's, you know, like a big family meeting worldwide, you know, like when there's been abuse in a family or abuse, like it's like everyone just kind of like wants to move forward and not talk about that shit, you know. It's like, and then someday you just have to have the fucking family meeting and everyone needs to sit down and you're like, oh, fuck, we can't not talk about this shit anymore, like. And it feels like we've had a huge fucking worldwide family meeting. You know, we're talking about it, which, yeah, so I'm turning up to any places that I can with my time and provide music and hope and service to talk about this stuff, so we don't just like, because even if it stops tomorrow in Gaza, like it's happening in Sudan, it's happening in West Papua, it's happening, and our ways of living on this planet right now are not sustainable in these ways anymore. The you know, American political landscape, like it's like right now is just like a circus, you know, and we can't turn away from the circus anymore and pretend like that there aren't real lives being affected by all these things. So yeah, it just kind of feels like anything that was, you know, of great importance and striving for, you know, prior to all of this is like a recalibration of it all. And I think I'm like honored to be in spaces with so many people here in Ireland, in Melbourne, in Sydney, who are in conversations about this recalibrating, you know, and what this, a new path forward is going to look like. And yeah, Gaza may not be rebuilt for a decade, you know, like, and that's fucking harrowing to feel, but we like have to learn from this, like, because there's no way of putting all this back into a box anymore, you know, like we can't just neatly, like we did with Iraq or Afghanistan or whatever, just neatly got put into the box and like put away, except for the people living there, you know, like neatly put away, and then we just like move on. I just feel like this is the time where we're not moving on from this. We are moving with this, and the pain of Gaza, I think, will be with me until the day I die. Like, I don't think that this is something that's ever going to leave our collective conscience. It's in our children's collective conscience now, and it should be. Like, we should not let this be, you know? So, yeah, I mean, music and art and writing about this and trying to speak to some of the things that, you know, I can seem to articulate sometimes, you know, seems to be a service. And I'm trying to, you know, figure out how that is. And at the same time, I'm trying to navigate a minefield of a music industry that, yeah, is not what I thought I was working in, you know? And so how do I also stay true to being an artist and work in such a toxic environment, you know? And then it's the same, like, Jesus, can't even go to the grocery store and buy your weekly shopping without being like, what can I buy, you know? But yeah, so it just seems like every day we're kind of faced with like the micro and the macro and the big, but like I wouldn't want it anyway. Like I wouldn't, it would take such disassociation and disconnection from self and such shadow, I think, to be waking up and this not be on your mind, you know? And there has to be, I have compassion in a way for those that are not able to access it, because what violence have they, you know, normalized in their life? Like, what internal racism, what have they accepted as like truth about humanity and or one portion of humanity? What have they decided about Palestinians? Like, yeah, it'd be heavy to wake up like that. So I feel in a way lucky, you know, that I'm feeling it all and feeling, because if I wasn't, I'd be, yeah, worried about kind of what levels of normality of violence, because I feel like what we're seeing happening in Palestine on the daily is only going to, and we're seeing it here with statistics of violence against women. Like, why is it okay to set your house on fire with children in it? Like, why is it okay to like go into a shopping center and stab people? Well, when your phone is showing you violence after violence after violence after, and our governments couldn't give a fuck, well then it's okay. Do you know? Like, it's like we're normalizing violence across the board. And I would prefer to be, like I am, an emotional fucking mess and sensitive to it all, but at least feeling. Because I don't want to normalize the violence in Palestine just as much as I don't want to normalize violence on our streets and in our homes, you know?
Do you think there may be a connection with how this land was so brutally colonized and still is, to how so many people living here respond to what's happening in Palestine?
Massively. I mean, so our stories and who we are, my beautiful friend Leah Áine talks about this, how we're like stitched to our lands. And no matter if you are like a few generations back from Ireland or something, you have stories that are in your lines, in your DNA and stuff that are stitched to the land in Ireland, you know? It's very hard to like stitch yourself to a land without connection with the first peoples of that land, do you know? And for me, my biggest honor on this land is to have worked with and be in community with so many Indigenous communities around this land, because I feel every time we're in circle or weaving or I'm hearing songs or whatever, I'm getting little stories that I understand about Chincogan, that mountain out there, or about Walgan, the shoulder at, you know, Byron Bay, or about Nathangali, the islands just off Byron. Like, when I hear their stories, like, I begin to feel connected and stitched to this land. And when you're not in right relation with the land, you are not in right relation with the people around you and with community. Like, you just can't be. And they're so, you know, I think some people think that it's like, oh, we need to, like, as white people here, like, pay for the sins of our, like, you know, ancestors or whatever. You need to acknowledge it, and there needs to be truth telling about it. But then also it's like, activate yourself to understand the stories and the people and the place of the land that you're on. Because as long as we're in disconnect to that, we are in disconnect and out of relation with each other. And I do feel the original violence on this land is so, it's just unbelievable amounts of violence that is just, again, like a rocker. It's been put into a box and it's been like, well, that was the late 1700s, let's put that away. But the real repercussions of that are still living amongst us. The real disconnection, the stolen generations, the people who had to leave their land, the people that lost family, like they're alive and living and connected. And you know, so if we ignore those stories and that pain, which I feel like Australia is just like, you know, like when I got here, there's just like, oh, you've moved to, you know, the land of dreams, the best country in the world. This is all coming from white people, you know, mostly white men actually. Best country in the world, and you can be anything and you can do anything, da 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 da. And it's like really like weird identity thing, which is like a massive identity crisis, like, because it's as if like they don't know who they are, so they're attached to this like white Australian identity, but then it doesn't want to acknowledge that they were Irish or English or Scottish or, you know, Italian or Greek or whatever. Like it's just like, oh no, we're like Australian, you know. And it's like, no, you are a settler on Bunjalung country or on Jajawaran country or on whatever. And I think until people start, you know, connecting themselves to that land, which is understanding the stories of that land and understanding the exact stories in their own bloodlines going back, and not to sit there and be like, oh, like shame and blah, blah, blah. The shame is to continue to act like a fucking colonizer on these lands. That's the shame. The shame is not to say, I am part of a lineage that did some shit here, but I want to move forward and do things different, you know? And I just think like, I mean, Ireland has its own shit going on and needs to have a group therapy session with fucking, Ireland needs to sit down in the therapy room together, okay? Because we've got like intergenerational trauma with alcohol abuse and the Catholic Church and all this sort of stuff, right? We got this thing over there. But Australia needs to fucking sit down in the therapy room. White Australia needs to fucking wake up and sit down in the therapy room together and just be like, okay, let's get our shit together. First, let's figure out who we are. And let's figure out, because the biggest gift you can give these lands and fight for Indigenous freedoms on this land is to fucking know who you are and know where your lines come from, know the stories, then find out the stories of where you are, and then figure out how to stop the ongoing fucking genocide in this land, which is not something that's like live streamed in the way that Palestine is, but it's something that you just have to know an Indigenous family or a group of people, or start activating your community to see how many children are taken away, how many are removed from family, how many are in the justice system, how many deaths in custody, how much like intergenerational trauma through drug abuse and alcohol abuse that is present because of colonial actions. You know, it doesn't take long to see. So unless like we're actively figuring out who the fuck we are, then you can't actually show up on lands and try to, you know, learn and stitch yourself to the place. And I think you can make the direct comparison right there with Israel and Palestine. Who are the people who are carrying on hundreds of years of caretaking for olive trees? Who are carrying on the traditions of Tatrice, literally stitching their stories, the kufiyas? Like, who are the people that are fighting for the land? And who are the people that are destroying indiscriminately nature, buildings, infrastructure, pollution of all of that waste? You know, it's not hard to see here. It's not hard to see who are the mining companies, who's that money, who's destroying the land, what are Indigenous communities doing? They're planting native trees and bush tuckers and trying to get their children back onto land and tell stories, you know? Like, you can always tell who the colonizing behavior is from their relationship to land. It's the same in Ireland. They felled all of our trees, you know, they sold them all off. They created land divisions and borders that didn't exist, you know, like it's what colonizing powers do, you know. So yeah, I feel like until Australia deals with that violence and the truth and a reckoning of that, you're just going to continue to see what we're seeing now, which is just more and more and more violence on these lands, you know, more and more prisons, more and more deaths.
What's your thoughts on those that were colonized becoming the colonizers?
I mean, that's when I say, like, Ireland, you know, like, we have to have a therapy session that does, like, go out and, like, go out to the 18, after we deal with it in Ireland, you know, like, there's 4 or 5 million people in Ireland, there's 80 million Irish people in the Irish diaspora around the world, you know. And I just always like, and here in this country, there's like 30% who have Irish heritage, who have these stories of resistance like me, who have the country and the story and the land stitched into themselves, but they've forgot about it, you know. And then out of a necessity for safety and community, like I understand why. Like I understand why you'd give up being at the bottom of the rung, you know, for a chance at, you know, a future for you and your family. Do you know what I mean? And unfortunately, it's very easy through trauma and post-traumatic stress to like disassociate and then take on the behaviors of colony. And especially when the behaviors of colony are so normalized, like they are here. It's just fucking normal.
And rewarded.
Yes, you know, and the media, the way that they portray Indigenous people, you know, like we were at a rally for women's violence last night, and, you know, white women, when they are murdered in this country, they're on front pages of newspapers. Indigenous women we don't even hear about their deaths, do you know? Like, you know, what do they, in Palestine, it's like one Israeli life is worth thousands of Palestinians. And you just have to look the same here. Like one white person's life is worth thousands of, like it would take thousands of Indigenous women to die for us to start looking at that in a year. You know, not one. Whereas like one, yeah. So where were we?
The colonized becoming the colonizers.
So, yeah, until we start like holding our institutions, our media, our leaders, like actually ask them to represent the people, but then us as the people have to recognize these behaviors, you know. And I think it's by design, you know. And that's when I say these institutions and media, it's by design that so many people here never heard about Palestine until October 7th. That was intentional design, because why did we know about it in Ireland for generations? So it's by design that Irish white people, for example, in this country came here and know nothing about their history, because they didn't tell you the history of this land, so they're not going to tell you the history of what happened in Ireland beforehand. They don't want you to know that you're Irish because they don't want you to know this fire. Because if all of the 30% of this population had this fire towards like Indigenous rights, that would be a revolution. And it did happen, you know. It happened in the what was that in Ballarat and all those places where the workers rose up, like that was the Irish stock. Ugh. Anyway, there's been Ned Kelly's and fucking
Eureka Stockade.
Yeah, the Eureka Stockade. That's like you know, like they put Irish people in jail here at the time of the rising in Ireland because they knew how many active, fiery fucking Irish people like me there were here, you know, so they put them in jail so nothing would happen. So it's by design that you don't know your stories, but it's like now there's no excuse. Just like there's no excuse, it's being live streamed by brave journalists on the ground in Palestine. And it just by, you know, the same token, you can access any information you want to know about your Irish history and all sorts of histories, because you don't have to go back far down many lines before you're going to find some fucked up shit. You know, like, but it's by design to make you become the colonizer, because then you replace the native population and you are the white supreme population in that community. And that is a design. That's what Australia was built as, you know. So like it's just like now you can no longer say that you weren't told about this. And now you have to be like, okay, now I need to untangle and all these knots and stuff that maybe, like I said, like my grandmother, she would silently tell us not to get English biscuits, but she wasn't out there fucking, you know, like on the front lines like I am. Do you know what I mean? So like it takes a couple of generations, you know.
So what has changed since October in the movement and in community?
I think, you know, hearing stories and watching films and documentaries and understanding where we are globally, I think there's so many people that had not a clue about Palestine. And I think one bit of hope that I keep holding on to is like there's so many more people that know, millions more that know now about the Israeli occupation of Palestine. And you can't unknow that, you know. And the BDS movement and, you know, Israel slowly becoming a pariah state along with America, you know. Like, there just is no, it can't go back into that little box and be put away anymore. So whilst the change does not seem fast enough and it's on the backs of Palestinian murders by the day, you know, the ultimate sacrifices are being made on the ground there so that we wake the fuck up, you know. So those of us that have and understand this, like we have an obligation, you know, and I feel like there's so many of us more now that will never shut up about this. And I do feel I wouldn't have felt this before October 7th, that I wouldn't have felt that we would see a free Palestine in my lifetime before October 7th. I thought that was an unsolvable situation, you know, as in like how are rocks and stones ever going to defeat one of the most powerful armies in the world? But the knowledge of what we all have now and the activism, and it's like I just feel like all these little circles and cells, we were all working kind of individually, like whether that was Indigenous rights here or like you know, LGBTQ rights there, or you know, battling Islamophobia here or whatever, or racism there, or like, you know, the Irish, you know, for a reunification of Ireland here. It's like all our little circles are like conjoining in these ways where we're like, oh, like you're fighting for the same thing over there as we are here. We're fighting for humanity. We're fighting against capitalism, against patriarchy, against colonization in just different forms, you know. And now that all these circles are uniting and these cells are growing, we will see a free Palestine. I have no doubt about that, you know. Like I am more affirmed in that, even though the level of destruction is at a place where, you know, I just can't, like, how many more babies do we have to see blown up, even though it's at that level, it's like it can't. America and Israel, their writing is on the wall, It can't continue like this. And in a way, I feel like what's being done now is making it so much more harder for there to be this two-state solution. It's making it so much harder for there to be Israel that we can all, respect. And that might be radical to say, but like the longer this goes on, the harder that is to see. Because it seems to me that even the calls for peace in Israel are still missing the basic human rights of Palestinians along with it. And until we can reach a stage where like basic human rights are enshrined for everybody, So I don't know, I know, I think about the Irish diaspora, 800 years of this, we have 80 million Irish people around the world, There's 7 million Palestinian diaspora, all who will return one day to Palestine, and the longer this goes on and the more displacement there's just more people to eventually welcome back to their lands, and that's what I have hope for.
What's next?
What's next?
Just a small question to end on.
I don't think we're going to see change on government levels. I think the two-party government systems, which is, the model of democracy all over the world, has shown itself to be what it is. They're bought and sold by corporation, and they have no moral background when it comes to actually standing up for much, So what's next is it's going to come from the ground up, it's a grassroots, people-led movement for people, I don't think we can sit here and wait for that. And I think resistance looks different in every country and every land. And the risk of that looks different in every country and every land. But I think we need to be as organized as the far right are, as the fascists are. They are so fucking organized. They are so fucking organized. And we can't just keep waiting for government to do it. I just feel like we keep waiting to vote in the right people to do this, to see change when look at Ireland, look at Australia, look at America, we just keep voting in the same type of people, even though they're different versions of parties and whatever thing, but it's the same model of bought and sold by corporation. That's stupid to hope for that sort of change, we have to look at the likes of Rosa Parks, in America, one person who refused to sit at the back of the bus, Bobby Sands in Ireland on hunger strike lost his life to free all the prisoners who were unlawfully being held in British jails. We as individuals actually can do things. The one woman that refused to hold the scan the grapefruit. We have to we have to start being willing to put our stuff on the line, And I have put my music, my career, my family at risk, 100%. But it's nothing in comparison to what it is to walking around in Gaza right now and living in a tent wondering whether you're going to be bombed that night with your children, So we each actually have to give up something We each have to take a risk. And that's going to look different for everyone, everywhere. But we all are the intifada in the end. We all are the resistance. We all are the rising. And we each have to do that. And then somehow we need to get as fucking organized as the fascists are in how our little cells operate and move. Because the tide has changed. Like there's no going back. But like it's like, how do we accelerate this moment? And I think that's what's draining for so many of us that have been here since the very first march. You know, here, the very first march in Ireland, the very first march in, you know, Germany, the very first march. Like, we're tired, you know, but like, there has to be an acceleration point at some stage soon, and we have to fucking hold on and keep refueling and don't stop. Like, don't stop putting your foot on it, and don't stop being willing to take risks. And I think that's what's scary now as well, is like what we're getting back is the acceleration from the fascist side, because they know that the tide has changed. Okay, so like their aggression and anger and inability to see what the fuck has happened for whatever reason means that they're going to come out. And so what I'm seeing now is that a lot of us that have been saying stuff and standing up, we are right now getting this like extra layer of pressure and heat on, you know, people coming up to us at marches, people in my DMs, people calling me all sorts of names again, kind of like in the October 7th aftermath kind of, but this is like at another level. And I actually see that as hope. Like I see that as the dying fucking attempts of like colonizing behavior, you know? It's like they know, so they're gonna fucking throw everything at us, and it's gonna be fucking scary.
Must be doing something right, hey?
Yeah. And it's not going to be comfortable. There's no way to fucking see freedom comfortably. No fucking people ever have done that. So like this shit is going to get uncomfortable, and it's going to get scary, and it's going to get harder. And we have to be willing to take the risks, you know? And I remember saying to a friend, you know, last night when we were there for something else, and, you know, a few people were worried about coming to things for Palestine or blah, 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 in comparison to going to things for like women's rights, you know, because of that fear. And I was like, if I had to die for this, like if that meant like me actually saying this and doing this, that I lose my job, or if I had to die for this, I'm fucking here till the end. And I think we all have to be willing to give up, you know, and maybe that's, you know, a little bit radical for some of you, but I like actually am like, what else is there to live for if I am not living for my humanity, you know? And so I think we all have to get to that stage where if I had to lose it all, at least I stood up for something, you know, and stood for the most important thing, which is our collective humanity. So that's what's next. Hopefully, you know, Bwehis or inshallah, I will not die, because I have a lot of music and a lot of shit to keep bringing out into the world, and I have kids to raise. But I'm here till the end, you know. And I think that's what this movement has. I mean, not that I haven't been involved in colonization conversations for my entire life, and no, I would be until the end. But I think this has brought about so many other people who are like, this isn't just like a hashtag moment or like a black square and then we go back to, this is us for life. Northern Rivers for Palestine is a group and a community that we will be connected to till the end of my lifetime, your lifetime, everyone's lifetime, because we'll keep fighting for collective humanity. And we would fight for Israeli children. We would fight for Indigenous children, we would fight for African children, we would fight for Irish children. Like, it's the same, you know? Yeah. Anyway.
Áine,
let's do it.
Thank you for your time.